In this video, we're going to look at the cell. So by the end of this video, we should be able to state the function of each part of a cell, be able to list the similarities and differences between plant and animal cells, and finally be able to describe the structural adaptations of some unicellular organisms. So first of all, what are cells? Well, cells are basically the tiny building blocks from which all living things are made. They're so small they can't be seen with the naked eye, and we have to use microscopes in order to magnify them so that we can see what they look like. There are many trillions of cells in an adult human body, and these are all working together to keep us alive. Now let's look at the structure of an animal cell. This is the type of cell you'll find in your own body. So first of all, let's look at the nucleus, and in the nucleus we find DNA. And DNA is the blueprint of life. Just like you need a blueprint to build a house, we also need a blueprint to build living things, like foxes and elephants and people. The nucleus also controls what the cell does. Next we have the cell membrane on the outside, and the cell membrane controls what gets into the cell and what cannot enter the cell. The cytoplasm is a jelly-like substance, and this is where all the chemical reactions needed for life happen. And finally we have the mitochondria, and the mitochondria are where a chemical reaction called respiration happens. Respiration is the controlled release of energy from food. And this is aerobic respiration, which means it involves oxygen. So the oxygen we breathe in is used in the mitochondria to release energy from the food we consume. It gives us the energy to do all the things we need to do on a daily basis. The next type of cell we have is a plant cell. And a plant cell has all the things we just discussed, but it has three things that are different. The first one we look at is the cell wall. So outside of the cell membrane in a plant cell, you have this additional structure, the cell wall, which is made of a tough material called cellulose. And the cell wall is very strong and provides lots of support to the plant cell. Now let's look at the cell vacuole. The vacuole is basically a bag inside the plant cell that's full of cell sap, which is water and sugar and some salts mixed together. If we remove water from the plant, we can see that the vacuole shrinks, and as it does so, the cell walls collapse in and the plant cell loses its strength, and this causes the plant to wilt. If we add water, the cell vacuole expands as it fills with water, and it pushes against the cell walls, and the plant cell becomes turgid, so it becomes very stiff. And all these stiff plant cells together provide support so the whole plant stands upright without the need for a skeleton. If plant cells didn't have a tough cell wall, well, as the vacuole expanded, eventually it would burst the cell membrane and the whole cell would burst. By having a cell wall there, this prevents the cell from bursting, and it can just become very turgid or very stiff and provide support to the plant. And the last structure we look at that's different between plant and animal cells are chloroplasts. And chloroplasts contain a green pigment called chlorophyll, and this is where photosynthesis happens. And photosynthesis is where plants make sunlight into food. And this only happens in plants, it doesn't happen in animals because animals don't have chloroplasts. And let's look at the idea of a multicellular organism. In multicellular organisms like these jellyfish here, many millions of cells are all working together to keep the animal alive. Now if we were to take one of these cells away from the group they're in, we'll see that it can't survive very long without those other cells. So in a multicellular organism, all the cells are reliant on the other cells around them to survive. They can't survive by themselves. So if you take a skin cell off your arm and put it somewhere away from your body, it won't last very long. It's very good at its job, being a skin cell, but it can only survive when it's surrounded by other cells that help it to do its job. Now, we also have a unicellular organism. This is a type of organism that's made of just one cell. This one cell can definitely survive by itself, unlike the cells we find in multicellular organisms. And here's an example of one. This is a paramecium. And we can see the paramecium, even though it's just one cell, is able to do many of the things a multicellular organism can do. So it can move, it can sense the environment around it, it can find food, it can release energy from that food through respiration. But it's just made of one cell. So we call these unicellular organisms. Now let's look at two examples of unicellular organisms. The first one is the amoeba. And this is found in pond water. And because it's always surrounded by water and that water can pass very easily into the amoeba's cell, sometimes it finds it's got too much water in its cell and needs a way of getting rid of it. And the way it does that is by using a structure called the contractile vacuole. That contractile vacuole takes excess water inside the amoeba's cell and it releases it into the environment. And this prevents the amoeba cell filling up with too much water and bursting. The next unicellular organism we find in pond water is called euglena. And euglena has chloroplasts, so it can make sunlight into food. But it also has a flagellum. This is a little tail that allows it to swim in the water. So this is a very good adaptation to surviving in a water environment. Okay, now if you'd like to take a quiz on the video, you can go to www.mrdoran.co.uk.